You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to begin? Look no further. The team at Dodge Media Productions has 20 years of experience as podcast listeners and observing the industry and 8 years experience in podcast production. We can help you take your podcast from idea to fruition, and we'll make the process seamless and easy. We'll help you with everything from recording and editing to hitting the charts on Apple Podcasts. So what are you waiting for? Contact us today and let's get started. DodgeMediaProductions.com.
Welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about Rental Family. Brendan Fraser, known for winning an Oscar for The Whale, is back in a film set entirely in Japan. Tokyo, I believe, with a journey to a place that is quite a far ways away from Tokyo, but I don't remember the name or have any idea of where it exactly is. We just know from a map that it looks like it's on the other end of the island. He plays an actor who has moved to Japan and is now struggling to find work, which is probably familiar to actors in every country, and happens to get a job based on his ethnicity, which is an interesting thing. I remember talking with Indian folks in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they mentioned that in Indian cinema, there was a stereotype of the evil white guy, the villain. And apparently there were a couple actors who made a very good living playing the villain in all the films. This is kind of a similar thing in that they really just wanted a big white guy. And Brendan Fraser, I think, as we discussed after the film, is at least 6'3". He's a tall fellow, but with the casting of the other people, it really makes him look giant, relatively speaking. And I don't know if the other actors were specifically cast to be smaller in stature, but he does definitely stand out visually. Not just his paler skin color, but his just build, his physique. He's so much taller. And that brings in this fish out of water, which is a common theme in this film, right? Is his struggles to assimilate and find his role. And I thought this film was kind of the best of all worlds. I don't know if people from Japan would call it a Japanese film. I would call it that from the aesthetic, artistically, of the film, but it also has what I would consider a fairly classic Hollywood dramatic story. It was very accessible to this Western viewer. I loved this film. I was really surprised. I was into it for Brendan Fraser. I've been a big fan of his. I may or may not have written a script for him, but I also liked all the trailers that I saw. I thought it was a clever premise of this actor who is hired to portray certain roles in people's lives. And early in the film, his character brings up, why not just go to therapy? And another character who is a Japanese native says something to the effect of, we don't do that here. It's a cultural difference. And they talk early on in Act 1 very explicitly about he doesn't understand because he's not really Japanese. And that is true.
Have you set up what he doesn't understand? What he doesn't understand is that there is a real business that exists in Japan where you can hire people to act, basically, but to stand in for family members. And so they had different scenarios. One gentleman even basically, and he was quite young to be doing this, but he even set up like a fake funeral because he wanted to hear everybody come and talk about, like, basically eulogize him in front of him. And so everyone involved appeared to understand that, like, everybody was in on this idea. Nobody, at least the attendees. And so he got to hear all the nice things that people would say about him if he were to pass. Now, I don't know if that's a common practice in Japan, but people were hiring stand-in husbands and stand-in fathers and different things. And so that's what Brendan didn't understand, that it was not for a theatrical performance or even a play performance, that it was a real life actor stand-in. And we don't really have any. I mean, I guess an escort service, you're paying someone to stand in as your girlfriend. But outside of that, I don't know if we really, I don't think we have anything like that here in, the Western states.
That's interesting, because the way that dialogue landed for me was that the character was telling Brendan's character that he did not understand why the Japanese didn't just go to therapy, not why they had the actors impersonate it. To me, it felt more general, like you just don't understand the psyche of the Japanese.
Okay.
But you could be right. I don't know. I think what you talked about is us not having any sort of relationship, or I should say any sort of occupation of standing in for another person except as a sex worker, is very interesting, because at one point they show that Brendan's character visits one particular sex worker regularly enough for them to know each other. And that was very interesting, given that the character that he was becoming in the film was somebody who impersonated for the purposes of bringing comfort to other people. His impersonation was never to defraud them. They were aware that this was a transaction, and the kind of the stakes in there is that there's a young girl whose mother is aware that she has hired Brendan to be a certain thing, but chooses to conceal that he is an actor from her daughter, which of course has consequences later on.
Ethical and moral consequences.
Yeah, and I must say, I would think from the start, the get-go, you should be able as a parent to predict that this was
I think
risky.
As a company, you should say, if you're going to entertain our service, although that's, as I started to say, that basically everyone needs to be on the same page, much like the funeral example. But then a woman hires Brendan's character, well, the company, she goes through the company, to act as a husband. But I thought, even, were the parents even in on it? Because it was almost like
Yes.
everybody because they just wanted it for the photos or something. It seemed
And
like.
to invite their friends, it seemed like.
So maybe the friends were in on it, but the parents knew this was all a sham.
Right.
Which, if this really happens, anyway, I'll finish because I don't want to make a judgment, but inside I am. But we're doing this just for the show because the parents knew she wasn't really marrying this fellow, and I don't know if the parents knew this because the audience is revealed that she's really lesbian, and she has a moment in a hotel room, like it's almost like it looked like a first look, like her partner comes in,
Right.
and they embrace, and they're so happy because now they get to move to America and be a free gay couple, without being under the, I guess, authoritarian or judgment of her parent. I don't know. It was just, it was sad that.
This is again a case where I think we don't understand the Japanese mindset.
Yeah, I don't.
Because to us, it would be preferable
To be
for
who you
your
are.
daughter to have a lesbian wife that's really who she's in a relationship with than to have this stand-in
Fake.
foreign guy that's
Yeah.
in the photos and you never see again.
And you never see, yeah.
That, to me, that seems...
Well, but not even you don't see your daughter. To me, I would rather have everything out on the table and still have a relationship with my grown child than...
Oh, absolutely. That was a thing which was perhaps designed by the director, who I believe was born in Japan, but she spent much of her life and went to school here in the United States. So that's why, by the way, as an aside, I think the film kind of merges those two aesthetics because she does.
Not only aesthetics, but ideals. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
you have to say that she went into it knowing that the American audience would view that particular interaction as a, huh? Because to us, well, maybe the people on the coast, but we're used to, oh, well,
Live and let
so-and-so's daughter married a woman. Like, okay, that happens. That wouldn't be a source of great shame, which it may
Right.
still be in some
may
parts
still
of
be.
Japan. I don't know. I can't really comment on the cultural part because I don't know.
Yes.
But to me, definitely, I think the director knew that most audiences in the U.S. would view that particular storyline with some degree of sadness that she has to go through this charade to pretend to save face. That seems to us unacceptable. And I think one of the characters even responds to Brendan's question about that, saying, why would you have
Why
this?
wouldn't you just...
So there's that aspect of him being a fish out of water and learning the culture in a sense. And there is a portion of that where he at one point is hired to pretend to be a reporter for this aging actor who is quite a hoot. He's, I guess you'd say, irascible maybe. I don't know what the proper word or pronunciation is, but he's a little bit ornery, but not in a bad way. Perhaps the Australians might call him a larrikin. He's a good-natured rogue. And he's unfortunately also losing his memory. And Brendan's character forms, which is Philip, I believe his name is Philip, and then a Dutch last name of some sort, forms a friendship with this fellow. And it goes through some ups and downs, as happens in films. And we see, in a sense, that actor is also playing a role, although he was acting in the way that Philip wanted to, which is just on film as an actor. But they both have that in common, and they go on a misadventure, which is interesting. We both talked about how some of the tumult could have been avoided by the simple expedient of telling the daughter that the older man was going to do this. But is that, again, Japanese culture, where if he had left a note, I don't know. That to me seems something that's obvious, but maybe it's not in that culture.
Right. Well, I think we know he couldn't have said ahead of time, hey, I really think your dad would benefit from this. Why don't you, take him to this town? It was basically the town he grew up, his birthplace,
Correct.
I would say. And because she had already said, he's going to ask you to take him somewhere, but don't take him. I promise you he'll get hurt.
Right.
And so I guess as a daughter, if somebody took my mom somewhere, I would much rather know, okay, I'm frustrated that this person went against me, but at least I know that my parent hasn't just walked off and is out somewhere, or is potentially in a harmful situation where a crime is being committed. If you're just frustrated that their acquaintance has taken them on a short trip, I would feel a little bit better. So I guess I was speaking as an adult daughter, just out of concern for a parent who just one day goes missing. And so I was just, rewriting the movie in my own way to say, I think he could have left a note. I think he still needed to do it the way he did, because I think had he asked for permission, the daughter would have shut it down and probably cut off communication. So I think Brendan had to do, and we see that, there's a couple mishaps, but for the most part, it goes well. The gentleman got what he needed. And so
Correct.
Brendan's kid, Philip, did a good thing by doing this, I think.
I would agree. Again, this is perhaps from an American perspective.
Yeah.
They would think maybe that we're cowboys, but I would agree. I think he did the right thing, even though maybe the daughter wouldn't have agreed to it ahead of time. One of the themes that I thought was fascinating about this film was when you first hear the premise of an agency hiring out actors to fill roles, the first thing you would think of is, well, what about the people there? So in the case of the wedding, right? What if the friends in the future wanted to interact with the husband, but he was gone because it was just an actor? But what we see over the course of the film is the opposite. The impact that this has on the actors themselves, not just Brendan's character Philip, but also this other woman who works in the office. I think her name is something like Aiko. And She's played by an actress I haven't seen her before. Vaguely reminds me in build of Kristen Kish of Top Chef fame, a slender woman, very pretty, and she several times impersonates the mistress. And we talked about this a lot. I still don't quite understand it. Maybe this is, again, a cultural thing, but there seemed to be a payoff for a gentleman to hire this woman to pretend to be his mistress such that his wife can get mad at her for being a mistress. I don't really understand how that's an advantage for the guy, but in this case, it happens more than once. There obviously is an advantage. And first time we see her get physically damaged, she gets smacked, which I would think going into that kind of a confrontation, you would know that would be possible and you'd be ready to put your guard up.
Especially if we're to assume that the ire in this apology, they call it,
right,
is directed towards the mistress,
right,
and doesn't appear to be directed towards the husband.
Yeah, and that seems wacky.
That's the part that we struggle with.
But then in the second time this goes through, you can see that it has an emotional cost on her as well. Again, super duper well written. I believe the director was the writer or the co-writer of the screenplay. Very well done. I thought, you see the scenes we talk about, everybody loves a callback. There's a bit about when the old actor visits temple. I would assume it's Shinto, maybe it's Buddhist, it's, I don't know. And that comes back at the end of the film with Philip. It's just so well done. And we talked after the film that it reminded, you brought up, which I would have, if you hadn't, it reminded us of Mr. Holmes, in that in some sense it's a slow film, but in other sense things continue to happen, the characters continue to evolve, and I really enjoyed that part of the film.
I don't think I would have said that this is a slow-paced film. Part of why I said that was we went with a group of people who go see movies and then meet afterwards to talk
Right.
about them. And shout out to Just Create Community here in Hillsborough. I wouldn't have called it that, but someone in our group fell asleep. And so I thought, because I used to do this very frequently, ironically, before we got Regal Unlimited. And maybe you wouldn't have been as frustrated with me. You said, I'm tired of paying for you to take a nap. And so I try very hard not to fall asleep now. But I don't think I ever felt sleepy in this one.
No.
To me, it didn't feel slow. To me, it was always progressing. To me, the movie was always moving. So the only reason I said that was I was trying to understand how you could fall asleep in this one. And so I said, maybe he's not sleeping well. And so, you get in a cold or in a warm, dark room, it's easier to fall asleep. But I understand what you're saying. Like, we don't mean this in a bad way, the slow pacing.
No.
It definitely, there wasn't action, there wasn't, adventure, it wasn't The Mummy. But
Or George of the Jungle.
Yeah, I think that the pacing was fine, but it did unravel as the story went, I guess.
I think I might say a contemplative in that regard. So there wasn't a lot of, action, but even with the characters, this is perhaps keeping with Japanese culture, there wasn't a lot of shouting or a lot of back and forth. Kind of the exact opposite of any Real Housewives episode, right? And I consider that a good thing. This was not intended to say that it was a boring movie, but the evolution of the character happened in a sedate pace. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but it's not big leaps and bounds. It was a slow evolution of this character. I liked how the people he worked with also evolved. This woman I mentioned, her opinion and attitude toward him changed over time. The owner of the company, you saw him change who he was as a person. There's a big reveal that none of us really saw coming with that character. But one thing I noticed, this is in the show don't tell category, is at the end of the film, they're in the same physical office, but it has been drastically redecorated. And in particular, his desk is now adjoined with everyone else's desks instead of being off to the side. And I think that has something to do with hierarchy in Japanese culture, but it certainly, to this American viewer, it showed him becoming part of the team. They changed their business practices as a reflection of this. So everybody kind of grows, and I thought that was fantastically well done. The plot line with the young girl whose father he impersonates, I think that resolved itself in a believable way. There was an opportunity to go Hollywood there that the director did not take, which I thought was good. It seems to have been shot mostly in Tokyo, as I mentioned.
Oh, yeah. It was shot all in Japan.
But it reminded me, some of the shots, of shots from Kyoto when Phil Rosenthal went there. Very beautiful. And in my mind, when I think Tokyo, I always think that famous intersection, right, with all the people crossing with the neon lights and the girls dressed in the outfits. So this was interesting that it was within Tokyo, but it was a different version of that, kind of like Los Angeles is widely varied. There are quiet neighborhoods in Los Angeles. So that was, I think, nice. I have so many good things to say about this film. I was surprised, but I really like this film. In my current mindset, how I rank movies, there is the highest category is I would watch this again. And because my queue is so long and continues to grow, rewatching a film takes quite a bit to take a slot for that. And this is definitely a film I would enjoy watching again. And if everything worked out right, I might watch it again in the theater. This is a really good one. I really love this film. I think Brendan's performance was subtle and brilliant.
Yeah, he's just amazing. I was so impressed with him in The Whale, and he deserved his Oscar win, I believe. And I think in this one, he is just such a thoughtful actor, and that comes through as the character, because he doesn't ever come off like he is being judgmental of the practices that this agency owner is asking him to do. He's more, like you said, more just inquisitive and kind of just thoughtful. Like, for example, when he is impersonating the groom, you know, that scene, he's kind of chickening out. He's nervous because he's like, this is a life event. This is a big deal. And he's not sure that he can, I mean, I think if he had been hired to portray a groom in a movie or a play, you have no ethical, moral issues. But when you're doing it in a real life situation, and I guess even, you know, is this a legally binding marriage? You know, like if we're going to carry out all of the customs and everything, am I now, you know, legally bound to this person? But I think even just ethically and morally, he was questioning, is this the right thing to do for this person? And I think that's where as a girl that was fatherless for most of her life, of course you want someone to come in and be a surrogate, you know, parent to you because you have a hole in your heart.
Sure.
And so to have someone step in and fill that. But then there's the ethical and moral considerations of, you know, a step parent can do that or an uncle can do that. And there will be some consistency and some longevity to that relationship because they're making the commitment to be in the family or be with your parent. But in this case, I think he knew, and I think he entered this one almost a little bit easier because it was only going to be for 3 weeks and it was to help this girl get in this school. He almost entered this one easier than the marriage.
Yes.
And they did, I mean, that one happened first. And so you could say like, oh, well, and then he gets into it and he realizes, oh no, this little girl is growing attached to me. And I think he was starting to grow attached to her. And then he realized, and he even makes a serious life decision because of this situation. And then as we could all see, you know, you could kind of see this on the horizon, it blows up for everybody almost. And the implications of that. And yes, you're right. I think Hikari did a great job not going for the Hollywood ending. It's a more realistic, but at least it wasn't like this poor girl now has suffered she almost like a second loss of a father. So yeah, just these, I love movies that kind of make you think, like, what are the ethical and
right.
moral and spiritual scenarios that happen in life, and how should we best handle them? I think that's what I love about movies, kind of making you think and kind of, what would I do in that situation?
This is an interesting premise. That's why I was interested as soon as I saw the beginning of the trailer. I thought this is an interesting premise to explore, and she definitely did. As you know, and all listeners will probably remember, I like a director who takes a stand. And she does. She takes a position. She says the way they were doing things isn't so good, and they get better at it. They change their ways, and they're doing better. I think that's fantastic. I want to give credit to other departments in this. For example, I mentioned earlier with the change to the layout and the decorations in the office, we see that there's a change. Another way, speaking of his attachment to the girl that we are shown, not told, is the girl at a class project. He's there as her father, and he's supposed to help her with an arts and crafts thing. She brings another little boy over whose parents, including father, are not present, and those two kids make what they call is like a sharktopus, I think, or something, but it looks a little bit more like a jellyfish to me because it's made with a coat hanger. And they give this to him, and he hangs it up in his apartment, and then later, after things go sideways, you see him taking it down. In both cases, they're in his dialogue, but that shows his emotional commitment to that. And we also talked right after the movie about his wardrobe.
Yeah, before you go into wardrobe, that's interesting that that's how you took it. I took it as it was too painful. Even though these objects brought him joy when he was in the relationship with the little girl, to me it was too painful now that she was no longer in his life for him to see them. And that made me sad because I was like, I'm going to start crying. Use those you were joyful when you got them.
Right.
And so, although I do understand that, because there have been times when I've had losses and I remove objects because seeing that object makes you sad.
Sure.
But instead of realizing the joy that you had when you used to see that object in your life all the time.
Another thing we talked about was wardrobe.
Yeah.
How the colors and the style and the cut of his clothes changed over the movie itself. This is one of those things that, in my opinion, is not talked about much explicitly, but
we
the
geek out over it.
costuming really can show a lot about a character.
Yeah.
In real life, I don't think it's as direct. A lot of times people have the clothes that they purchased and they could afford, but hey, this is a motion picture. We can buy a bunch of different clothes for Brendan. So I liked, again, like you said, in the last scene of the movie, or one of the last scenes, his casual clothing. It was more comfortable, but also more tailored. Early in the film, he's in a lot of very baggy, almost ill-fitting, that shows how he doesn't really fit into the world around him as well.
That's interesting that you say that you thought they were baggy. To me, it felt more confined. I felt like early in the film, he had on not only multiple layers,
well, that's kind of what I meant.
They seemed
he was
smaller.
Padded. Well, the outer coats always seemed overly large to me. There was one where it wasn't this overcoat, but it was like another kind of jacket, and it just looked like it was at least a size too big to my eye.
It made him look like, I was trying to figure out, because obviously from The Whale, that was a ton of prosthetics, but I was trying to figure out, it made him look overweight in the beginning of the film, and then by the end of the film, he just looked normal.
Right. I mean, that was kind of, I think, what I was getting at. But it tracked. Yeah, I don't think the actor or the prosthetics or anything was used to make him change size throughout the filming, although you had mentioned that he was in Japan for many months for this project, but I don't think that was it. I think the way it read to my eye was the clothing choices.
Yeah.
And you also see different color palettes coming in throughout that.
Darker in the beginning, lighter in the end.
Right. I also mentioned to some folks after the film, one of the things I particularly caught my eye was the cinematography. In particular, they used a lot of very shallow depth of field. And I know there are some people that decry that as a cliche in Hollywood, but I actually think it works extremely well. I think the use of the term bokeh to describe the out of focus parts of the background is coincidental. It's not necessarily only Japanese aesthetic using a shallow depth of field, but I thought that was kind of an interesting coincidence. It worked very well, but of course the cinematographer did not do that in all cases. We have a lot of long shots of them walking on this trail, and he uses a very deep depth of field because that makes sense. So it's not a cliche, in my opinion. I think it was used effectively throughout the film. I thought it was shot gorgeously. The lighting was great. I don't know whether they only filmed during delicious cloudy days, but the lighting was nice and soft throughout the film. For the most part, there may have been some bright sunny days, but I think in general, the interiors as well, the lighting was gorgeous. Just really super well done from a visual perspective, both production design and the camera department. They did a great job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a beautifully shot movie. I was wondering, you know, we've watched enough kind of, I don't know, dissections of film or explanations of different film choices, film compositions, different things. And they talk about, you know, we've even witnessed when we saw Roofman. Kirsten Dunst's character is in I think even a white blouse or a cream colored sweater, and everyone else has dark colors on because the eye goes to the light part of the, so not only do they sometimes use lighting to well lit the star, but clothing choice. So we've talked about this before. And that's the filmmaker directing your eye to where they want you to look. So is that potentially why they use the shallow depth of field? Because if you don't want us to see the ice skater or the roller skater that's, you know, in the background and maybe even falls or whatever, especially if you're kind of running and gunning, if you're shooting in a park and you can't clear the background. Do you use a shallow depth of field so that activity is not in focus, and so somebody won't accidentally miss the conversation between Philip and the little girl, and because they're watching the rollerblader in the back? Is that maybe a choice? Another reason why they choose shallow depth of field.
That's the reason I like to use it, to direct the eye. What is interesting is human beings' eyes work with the same optics as the camera, but because the way our brain works, it refocuses anytime our eye moves. We never actually see anything out of focus because wherever we're looking is always as in focus as the brain can make it. So this is one of those things that in film, we are, in a sense, cheating. We're making something that's not strictly factual, but it's more artistic. It works better. And I mentioned some people are pushing back a little bit on it. One of the downsides to that, of course, is you do lose that detail in the background. So if your art department has gone to great pains to populate a bookshelf with really clever titles, you may not see those. It is a trade-off, right? Different cameras are going to respond the same probably, but it's the lens itself, the aperture, which is going to control that. And when you go through that as a cinematographer, I'm sure there are decisions and discussions between the DP and the director about that. I just noticed it in a good way. I like that because, as you said, for me, it draws the eye to a certain spot, and that's what a director would want to do, presumably. I don't know from an auditory standpoint whether there is similar techniques that they can use. I presume in the mix you can play with the sound design, as perhaps the only audio that comes out of the day of shooting is just the actors on their lavs, and everything else is built up behind it. So you probably do a similar thing with maybe volume to have the background sounds present but not competing with the dialogue. That's all, in my opinion, part of the cheating that we do in filmmaking, because we're trying to tell a story in the best possible way.
Well, yeah, oh yeah, you definitely make certain sounds more present than others, especially to that degree. If, let's say, you had somebody in the background that was trying to get the attention of somebody in the foreground, their voice is going to be at a lower volume, because if we were in that real environment, it would be lower because they're farther away from the audience who is kind of the camera. So,
but much like we are with our depth of field, we're cheating, we're making a thing that's maybe not strictly accurate to the physics. It's the same with the sound, that when we see someone walking, their footsteps could be added in Foley and are louder than they would have been if we were standing in the hallway that they were walking down, but it makes sense to our brain. That's the part I was trying to get at. We're doing things where we're capturing truth, even if it's not strictly accurate to the physics of the situation when we filmed it. And that, to me, is done very well here. If it's done poorly, right, it stands out. It looks silly or sounds silly. In this case, this is just, I think it's an artistic, beautiful, gorgeous film. And I love the story and the evolution of the character. The B plots are fine, but this really is a movie about Brendan's character, Philip, and he brings it. I loved his work earlier in his career where it was a little more playful. You know, we talked about George of the Jungle and The Mummy and Blast from the Past and these different things, and I would love to see him do something lighthearted like that again, but with The Whale and with this film, more serious work. I'm really incredibly impressed with his ability to pull it off.
Well, honestly, his first movie was of serious nature. It was School Ties with Matt
That's
Damon.
right, School Ties. I don't know if he is Jewish or not. I didn't think so. But I believe School Ties was about a Jewish student, wasn't it?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Anyway, I do know it was a serious movie about activities at like a boarding school. So yes, he has quite a bit of range. Really impressed with his work there. And also the commitment to spend 8 months or whatever it was on location or in Japan doing this. He comes across as such a likable fellow. I understand this is a role he's playing. The actor is different than the role. But watching this film, you just want to give him a hug, right? He just seems like a solid
He seems like
person.
such a sweet man that you would be lucky to work with in your, and have in your film.
Right.
Which I loved your script. I'm just going to say it, your script that you wrote, that you had him in mind. I still secretly wish that we could pull it off. Although I don't think he could play the part that you wrote for him, but I want to now like shoehorn some.
Yeah, I would rewrite some part of it to
Yoda
get him
style,
in there.
wise man that he would impart.
He's a few decades older now than when originally envisioned.
I think it would be awesome.
I do too. I would, I think, enjoy working with him. And I would probably enjoy at least talking with the director as well. I think she did a fantastic job. I really dig the cut of her jib and how she approached this. What a unique premise, but it was approached in a thoughtful way that had good things to say. Just fantastic film. It reminds me a little bit of Honora in that I went into it figuring I'd like it, but I got something totally different than I had expected. And I seem to be saying that a lot recently, so maybe I don't parse trailers very well, but this was just a fantastic film. I think it is a little different than Honora because I don't know if it's going to get the Oscar run that Honora did. His performance, I think, could get some sort of recognition, but I would be super happy if it did get awards. I think this is a super film.
I think it will definitely get some nominations. I think specifically, I bet Searchlight put it out in late November for that purpose. And we've been seeing trailers for a while, so that it was completed and they released it now.
They're targeting a specific calendar date.
So I think it will get some noms. I hope it will and I've been seeing good buzz, in the trades kind of that I follow. So yeah, here's hoping.
That'd be interesting. Of course, we would be happy to have Brendan on the podcast if
Please?
he wants to call in even. Doesn't have to come in person.
He at least went to school in the Pacific Northwest.
He did,
So he's
a bit
familiar.
up in Seattle area. I
But we
will
could
mention,
accommodate a
if he
Zoom.
did want to come by in person to the studio, he could sit with the pod dog. I would
Yeah.
let him do that.
Yeah, Pod Dog's been good this episode.
Yeah. I often don't give recommendations in our podcast, but I do recommend that people see this film.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I think we always give recommendations.
Well, I try not to. I try to give it more in the standpoint of if you liked X, you like Y. I don't really know if I have a good analogy for that. So I just like this film a lot. I think it's worth a watch. Who knows when it will make its way to streaming? So go see it in the theater.
Yeah.
Get some popcorn and watch a good
Yeah,
flick.
in fact, there is someone in that group hadn't been to the theater in 5 years and said they were glad that they went and saw it in the theater.
Yeah, this is a great way to get back in
And
the
I think
theater.
this is an easy movie to accidentally pick up your phone and start, having it be a second screen. And I think it behooves you, as well as I think it'll be
Yes.
better for your viewing pleasure if you one screen this, which is why I like seeing things in a theater. It forces me to one screen.
Right. That's a good point. This is a one-screener.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a movie recently on streaming, which was a silly film starring a guy who has a couple sitcoms under his belt, and it was a two-screener. It's a film that I don't think really loses much if you're playing Heyday on your phone while monitoring it. This is not one of those. This is
a one screen.
This is a one screener.
Give it the breadth, like to be able to.
Yeah, and I think too with the gorgeous visuals, perhaps the theater is also a better choice.
Yeah, I agree. Oh my gosh, the scenes when they go on the trip with the older gentleman. I mean, it's just beautiful. I mean, it reminded me of Oregon, in which I've heard that Japan and Oregon kind of have the same climate. But, oh my God, just these beautiful ocean vistas with these rocky shores and the trees. Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts about Rental Family?
Go see Rental Family.
Yes. And remember, Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.